This program is a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line is made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support is provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line.
We're here at Bard College to discuss for the second hour the question of whether or not immigration should be curtailed. Arguments for doing so have been made very strenuously and eloquently by Peter Brimelow in his book Alien Nation. Mr. Brimelow was born actually in Great Britain and is living in America and is an editor of Forbes and of National Review. Ms. Huffington is widely published and agrees substantially with Mr. Brimelow. And Mr. Stein is the chairman of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. On the other side, Mr. Frank Sharry is the chairman of the counterpart organization, the National Immigration Forum, which encourages immigration. Ira Glass is the head of the American Civil Liberties Union. Leon Botstein is the president of Bard College and important musician and musicologist, and finally, of course, Mayor Koch, Mayor Edward Koch of New York. Now, let me ask you this question. I think I'll ask Mr. Sharry to comment on this. Is it or is it not a burden of a society into which an immigrant comes to use Nathan Glaze's term, to socialize that person, i.e. to get him used to the conventions, the mores and the folkways of society? And is this a subject which you have addressed in the course of encouraging increased immigration?
Yeah, well, let me be clear that we encourage increased legal immigration. There's a very important distinction to be made between legal and illegal immigration.
You didn't think I was going to say you encourage something illegal.
Well, just wanted to make sure. Most Americans have a difficult time distinguishing. On the other hand, on the question of socialization, yeah, it is the burden of the society, but I think this is something where the United States has such power, and it's assimilative powers. It is the nation that is looked to by the world, and you have people who have chosen to come here, and they want to embrace our customs. I mean, they come here because they want to pursue the American dream, because they want to speak English. They want to be able to be mobile in a free society. And the idea that we should be threatened by newcomers who choose to come here, who are learning English quickly, who are assimilating quickly.
I didn't say we were threatened. I said, should we do it? Now, a while ago, you had to answer questions about the Constitution, for instance, if you voted for the first time. That's been abolished.
Yeah, no, it hasn't. There is a citizenship test. You have to speak English well enough to pass a written test, a verbal test, and there's a set of civics questions.
Frank, I have actually taken that test,
Right.
and it is a joke. You know, I was asked if I knew who the Vice President of the United States was, who was Dan Quayle, and as a proof that I could actually write English, I was asked to write down my name. So please do not call this a test.
Well, I would say that many
Census Bureau-
Americans would have a difficult time
The
passing
Census Bureau,
the
Frank,
civics exam administered
the
by the
Census
Immigration
Bureau
Service.
is reporting now that about a third of the immigrants who came in since 1980 and became citizens told the 1990 census that they couldn't speak English, although, as you know, until 1990 they were supposed to speak English to become citizens. So the system has collapsed.
I want to cite the second-generation evidence from the 1990 census. It shows that both foreign-born children and native-born children, that is to say, with one immigrant parent, show a rising proficiency in the English language. The point is that the socialization process in this country is no different than it ever has been. It takes 1 or 2 generations for English to be the primary language and the language of choice. And our memory is very short. We do not remember that our parents, whether they be Polish, Italian, Jewish, or Russian, and particularly the German language, was sustained in the Midwest and in the urban centers for more than 2 generations.
And apparently we don't remember that there are reporters involved as well that allowed that assimilation to take place.
The most helpful factor that we haven't discussed is television. We are an international, worldwide society. American television and American movies are shown all over the world. So
And
people
English.
are not taken back when they come to the United States. Obviously, they're very appreciative that they're here. And then you look at the illustration of Israel. 120 different nationalities have come in, including the Falasha of Ethiopia. And now there are officers in the Israeli army, which happens to be the institution that brought them all
There's also a strong
together.
movement in Israel now to curtail immigration, isn't there? Because of the,
No, the movement
capacity of any nation.
Not to change the subject.
Of any
You're
nation.
The movement is to say that the law of return does not include Christians. The law of return says that if you're born of a Jewish mother, you can come here with your relatives who may be Christians. They have an even broader...
Israel and the United States is not helpful. Let's stick with the United States.
Yes, we really need to look at the fact that at the moment 2,300,000 children in public schools do not speak English. We cannot really exaggerate the effect that multicultural experiments and bilingual education have had. We really need to address them. And the problem is not the immigrants. It's that they come into a country which at the moment no longer really believes that there is such a thing as an American identity, which now believes that we all should be split up into little multicultural groups.
The majority does not believe that,
But
but
I feel like
a minority
I don't believe
has
it.
captured...
I don't believe it, and no majority believes it. And I think Mayor Koch made an excellent point. We simply underestimate. We've created this scare about multiculturalism, which has very few followers really in America. And the fact remains, every American kid on the street and every person in the world knows the primacy of English.
That's
to do
just
anything,
that's quite wrong,
it's simply, historically, you're wrong because you're not a historian. You have looked at the immigration statistics and the language proficiency statistics, and your arrogance is absolutely implausible.
In New York City, the education system is educating in over 100 languages.
You don't know the statistics of children who've gone to school and dropped out of school in the 19th century, their language proficiency. In fact, we're doing a better job than was done 100 years ago.
The Census Bureau.
A better job now than 100 years ago.
My wife teaches in a New York City public school in Manhattan with 30 kids who very often each year come in speaking 15 different languages. By the end of the year, they all speak English. You do not know what you're talking about.
Well, in that case, the U.S. Census Bureau. In that case, the U.S. Census Bureau doesn't know what it's talking about because it says that 2% of native-born Americans can't speak English. A completely new development.
There are advocates in New York in large numbers and elsewhere in the country who do not believe in what we used to call the melting pot, the cultural melting pot, and instead want people to continue to be estranged and to speak Spanish or to speak Korean. And I have no objection if they also speak English. But to insist, as many people do in these fields, I think that they're harming the very children that they want to help, that they stay with their mother tongue, not as a crutch to learn English, but as an equal language before they learn English.
Virtually nobody believes in that.
Would you be in favor of eliminating the $5 billion bilingual education program? Would you be in favor of that?
I would be in favor of putting a better bilingual program, which is what Mayor Koch says, which uses, excuse me, has always been the case. I came from a multilingual home, 2 languages as an immigrant, and the fact is there's no evidence, cognitive by psychology, that we are a monolingual people. Many people, the Swiss do it, the Europeans do it, can learn many languages simultaneously, even poor people. So therefore, why not have a better bilingual system?
Because you see, that's the problem.
We're all in favor of learning a lot of languages, okay. But we know that there's been a sundering fight in America over the question of bilingual education. In fact, one senator proposed a constitutional amendment saying this is an English-speaking country. But now I know a 17-year-old who is now in a parochial school, having been in a public school up until then, and he speaks broken English. And I asked him why, and the answer was that only one of the 6 classes that he took in the New York public school was taught in English.
And that class was physical education.
That's accurate.
I'm sure there's a lot of failure. That's terrible.
But that is the failure of government. That is the failure
Not the immigrants'
of Americans
fault. Not the immigrants'
to control their bureaucrats.
Look, the failure of the current system is that the schools, the hospitals, the roads were in the affected community get no consultation from Congress, who are the people who make the rules. If you ask the parents, if you ask the residents, who are in the areas of the country that are most highly affected, whether they want to continue to admit 1 million plus people, plus those coming illegally for an indefinite period of time. You guys who live completely,
you just switched it.
you guys who are completely isolated from the impacts of immigration are cavalierly dismissing the concerns of all the people who are concerned about these
The mayor
areas.
of New York is hardly insulated from immigration.
You have just switched the argument.
You take a look at the quality of public education in New York City. Take a survey of Americans and say, would you move to New York City to put your kid in a New York public school? And I guarantee you the answer will be no.
Okay, Mr. Koch has the floor.
Congress has nothing to do with that. Congress doesn't legislate in the educational area. It does not. The fact is that everything that we've objected to in New York City and every place around the country that would separate the children of immigrants and keep them separated on the basis of from where they came, that's done locally. The Congress has nothing to do with that, and so that's why I say you are blaming those poor congressmen.
Demographic impacts of immigration are all set federally in Washington, D.C., in the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. There is no consultation with the affected governors.
That doesn't affect Puerto Rico.
The problem is that many liberals like Leon always say the same thing. Bilingual education is not working. Let's try a better policy. Let's try a better affirmative action. Let's try better welfare policies. At what point, and after how many trillions of dollars have been spent, and after how many lives have been destroyed, are you going to be prepared to say that these things don't work, period? There is nothing better to do about them. Let's just scratch them.
But Ms. Huffington, first of all, suddenly it's like a snake. We started with bilingual education and affirmative action. Every other ill was tacked on. Let's stick with bilingual education. What I believe, whether I'm a liberal, I believe that we have not done our job in education. And that job is whether it's done through a reorganization of how we do it. I'm not suggesting we debate here, but we haven't done the job. And I do think, in terms of immigration, which is what we're debating here, that the pressure on the young people and their parents who are coming here is very much in the direction, and all the data shows it, of English acquisition. That our schools are run often by people who have idiotic ideas is not the problem of the immigrants.
The system is not working. If you have the evidence that your public schools, the infrastructure, housing availability, if you take a look at all the various measures of quality of life in the high-impact areas like Los Angeles, Southern California, certain parts of Texas, Miami, New York City, if you look at quality of life, as your average educational attainment, number of people living in housing units, quality of public education, and a whole range of other environmental factors, crime rate,
and you think that's
commuting
because of the
time, those things all
you find exactly you find exactly the same thing in Chicago, in St. Louis, Philadelphia.
I mean, if you take areas of the country that are not high impact,
every city,
you will find exactly the opposite trend.
Immigrants for every ill you can imagine.
Why Americans are moving out and moving to other areas of the country.
But let me ask you a question, Dan.
Look at the statistics that have meaning.
What you're saying has a lot of truth to it, because it's historically the fact that New York City in the 19th century was an immigrant. People complained about it because it was a place of immigrants and other people moved out. There's always this demographic. It's exactly. It is in our tradition. It is in our tradition that that's going to be the fact.
Perhaps I can ask Professor Botstein a question, Bill.
Up until about 1910.
Dan, if you ended all immigration tomorrow,
right,
the problems would not go away. The same multicultural bureaucrats would be teaching the children in those classrooms.
The multicultural agenda has any saliency at all is because as they trot them out every meeting, the demographic, ethnic base of the country is shifting. Therefore, their agenda has to prevail.
That's not the argument that the ethnic base is shifting with multiculturalism.
That's what they rely on.
It is that every tradition has to receive equal time, and it is ridiculous. We are a country, and I agree with Peter on this, that is founded in the Judeo-Christian ethic, in Western European mores, and I deplore those who want to shift us away from that. And it doesn't make any difference whether we come from Asia or Africa or Latin America. There is an American ethos.
So let's take a time out to absorb and assimilate.
And the immigrants want to be a part of it.
Let's take a time out.
We, in charge of the immigrants in these different areas, who prevent them.
Mr. Miller,
Mr. Mayor, that's like saying that we have a cold, and if we didn't have a cold, we could go outside in the rain. And we do have a cold, but it is but you know, we can't get rid of it. So why go into the rain? I mean, in other words, this is exacerbating the problem. That's the key issue. We're not saying it's unique to it's caused by the immigrants, but it's exacerbated by the immigrants.
But what Mayor Koch said is extremely important. I don't think we can just say that let's reduce drastically the levels of immigration, with which I agree, and then all will be well. At the same time, we need to attack all those problems head on. And then I think it's not enough to just say it's immigration. And it's not blaming immigrants at all, because the problem is what this country has become. We cannot assimilate immigrants. But if we continue to bring them in at the present numbers, it's going to be even harder to assimilate them.
Unless there's a pause.
Yeah, but
the point is there's always been pauses in American history.
Where we disagree is, and I think it's an interesting disagreement, we feel, I feel, that bringing immigrants actually is a positive act on behalf of the development of the American character and creating that. The fact that we're an open society and that we consider citizenship something we can get, you're not born with. We're not Switzerland. We're not Germany. We're not Austria. And the continuing of that tradition, which has been our history, is in fact in favor of the reform.
But the last 30 years have changed our history. The last 30 years have made us a kind of great society.
We don't think so.
America of rights and
we think that at every point in history where there has been a large immigration flow, people have said the same things
and
that you are saying now, and they have always, and they have always been wrong.
That's not
they
true,
were
because
wrong
they were.
then.
That's
they are
simply not
wrong
true.
now.
That's not true.
And what we are doing is scapegoating immigration for a whole range of other problems that you don't want to talk about.
Mr. Glasser,
Look, an employer.
how do you account for the 4 great historical pauses in immigration, which were in fact legislated? What were the impulses that brought them on? Was it xenophobia?
In 1924, absolutely. Read the legislative transcript in Congress. It had nothing to do with pause. It had nothing to do with numbers. It had everything to do with ethnic exclusion.
And do you think
that's what it had to do?
But you don't understand.
It happened at a time of rampant racism. It had nothing to do with these things.
What about the whole settlement house movement, the reform house movement?
For a moment?
You've gone on too long. You've made your point.
You're dealing with historical revisionism of the worst kind.
I'm not saying that mixed motives aren't involved when such legislation happens. I'm saying that, in fact, it did happen at 4 different times in American history, and it could be viewed retroactively, that made the assimilation easier and more effective, thus opening us up to renewed
But in view of the fact that the rate of immigration today as a proportion of our total population is in fact so much smaller than it was at the time of that pause, that is at best an exaggerated and overwrought
That just means that
argument.
China should take more immigrants in than Australia. But see, look, 48 Hours showed employers firing American workers and bringing in Indian programmers at half the wage. Would you guys support your employers firing you and bringing in an immigrant to do your jobs?
Yes, I would support a meritocracy in which the best people are hired. We believe in free trade. We believe in the market. I think all of you believe in the market. So the fact is, in the competitive world that it discriminates somebody because we compete against, do we need the best scientists, the best engineers, the best teachers? Yes. If they happen to be foreign born, that's the advantage of America. It's about merit, isn't it? And therefore, why do we discriminate because they're not the right nationality? And on the facts of the pause, let me say that the rate of population growth here, in terms of immigration and the percentage of foreign-born, is lower than it was before and right after the pause. And the reasons for the pause after America's entrance in the First World War was, in fact, a lot of very unattractive xenophobia.
But do you
what Leon is saying is that this is not a nation.
Historical facts.
I would
But it's
reject that portion of our immigration laws that allows an employer to go to a foreign country to seek out workers and offer them half of the wage.
Right.
But I want to tell you,
how every major immigration flow got going.
I want to say to you, that doesn't mean that the immigrants are at fault. It means that the law is at fault.
Every major immigration flow has gotten going by employers going overseas to bring people here to work. And that even includes the slave trade.
Most immigrants came without employment.
Let me respond.
Not true.
All that I am saying is, I don't have a problem in the competition of people when they come here, but to go out and recruit workers in foreign countries to come here at half the wage, I'm absolutely against that. And if the existing law allows that, change the existing law.
I don't think anyone is attempting to assail the motives of immigrants. They want something better for themselves and for their children. Sure. So they take a lot of risks. They go into a country where they don't even speak the language, and they start at the bottom of the ladder. But we're not talking about the motives of the immigrants or even the motives of the people who write the law. We're talking about the impact of immigration.
Change the law and you change the impact.
That's right. That's right.
Mr. Buckley.
And what are the indices that that impact is something beyond what we welcome?
Let's talk about indices. The question is socialization. In terms of learning the language, the research is very clear that immigrants today are learning English at a faster clip than our grandparents at the turn of the century.
Nearly half of the immigrants
that is the
don't
state
speak
of, that is
English.
the best intelligence that the researchers can tell us. That the issue of English language is resolved in a generation. Can you imagine a child growing up in this country and not wanting to learn English?
That's what the census. That's exactly what the Census Bureau says.
Acting in a way that makes the immigrant grandmother upset.
Let's not make a comment about that. He's had hands-on experience. Is it safe to say that everybody who arrives from Puerto Rico to New York City knows English by the time he's 20, 25, or she is 20, 25?
I think so, although I don't have any statistical evidence to that
Within 15 years,
But based on my
75%
experience, rarely have I, if ever, found someone in that age bracket who, having been in this country for a year, couldn't speak English.
Well, the people that you were denouncing a moment ago for not doing their job as educators simply prolong
Yes, they prolong it, and the English that they speak is not your English.
Well, that's which of course explains the class basis of the argument.
Yes.
But see, the data in this 90 census, and it will be confirmed in the 2000 census, are quite clear. Immigrants are becoming, on average, less educated. They're not bringing the same job skills, and this is because of the family preference component. If the first wave of Cubans comes over after Castro took over, they're highly educated, a lot of property, their average incomes blow away natives very quickly. But as you move down the relative chain, you find their educational attainment declines. And now you find in Southern California, the children of the immigrants themselves tend to come in, and their children, the educational attainment of the parents is declining very rapidly.
I suppose a critical question to ask in inquiring into this is, what is the circulation of Spanish language newspapers and of Spanish television? Is that growing? If it's growing, then we're not winning that particular fight.
And also, Bill, why are we printing millions of even voting ballots in Spanish? If these people can all speak English, then why are we printing ballots in Spanish?
The census says that 45% of the immigrants who are in the country right now tell the census that they don't speak English very well. It's a very high number.
I mean, we're talking about second generation. We're talking about assimilation and acculturation, which has always been a multi-generational factor. So the question is, immigrants is always going to be a percentage. There's also a high percentage of American adults who are illiterate. And there's also the general education level of Americans is nothing to brag about. And so the question, the immigrants are probably not any better, not any worse, given the abilities of language.
So why take the risk, Bill? That's the key issue.
My father, who was a wonderful man, now deceased, came here when he was about 14 or 15 years of age, learned to speak English, but never learned to write. He never went back to school here. And when about 75, he got a job as at Bloomingdale's to check fur coats, and people would come in, and he would say, "Would you please write out your address and your name, please?" And they would write it out, and then he would look at it and he would say, "Oh, I see by your address that my son is your congressman." And it didn't make any difference where they lived.
Right. And the fact is, his son knows how to read and write.
He could vote. So of course he could. It happened. Yes.
But the real issue here, Bill, is why take the risk? I mean, maybe Ira's right, this is all going to work. Maybe we're right that it doesn't show, it's not showing up very well at the moment in the census. But the question is, why take the risk?
You
can't show any particular
because it's
benefit.
the nature of this country.
Then why did they cut off immigration in 1924?
Because this nation was built on immigration for its entire history, and there's no reason to change it. That's why we're a great nation. You don't understand it.
I want to respond.
Fundamentally don't understand this.
Well, in that case, why does 60-70% down? Why does 60-70% of Americans say they want to see immigration cut off? Why is there's never been more than 13% of Americans wanting to see immigration increased for the last 40 years?
Well,
so
obviously they know ungenerous to the next person down the line.
Oh, that's baloney.
No,
the point, American people are generous people who are not afraid of people who are different. But the bottom line is that the purposes of immigration have changed very clearly. We established during the colonial era specific purposes for immigration, and then with the Northwest Ordinance, as I said, 1787, we established a template to admit the new territories under the cultural framework of the received common law and the British experienced the cultural and commercial framework that enabled us to build a nation out of the wilderness. Now,
our
we
immigration policy
brought
now has
immigration up
specific
and down
purposes.
in response to the national need. You guys are laying out a bunch of rhetoric, a bunch of ivory tower rhetoric that has nothing to do with the fact that we as a nation do not need immigration
okay, Dan,
at this point in
go
our
ahead.
national history.
Look, our immigration policy serves very specific purposes. It's
Botstein.
to strengthen families by reuniting nuclear and close family members. It's to bring skilled workers to help American companies stay competitive in a
Don't
global
need 'em, don't want
marketplace. It is to stand up for human rights by protecting 1% of the world's refugees who are resettled here. Those are very specific purposes that serve our national interests. I don't see what they're...
Do you understand the anger of many working class and middle class Americans when they hear about Chinese bringing in their fathers, who then proceed to put all their money into their children's name and collect welfare benefits?
That's
Do
right.
you
And I
understand
also understand that Silicon Valley has been
But
driven by
why don't
foreign
you answer that
entrepreneurial
question?
energy.
Frank,
I'd say yes, I do understand the anger.
Would you like to see some changes in the policies
Oh,
whereby
absolutely.
are you in favor of reducing welfare benefits to eliminating welfare benefits to illegal
Already,
immigrants?
that's the law.
Are you
it's not
not the
enforced.
law in many
Absolutely.
Not
states.
enforced.
No, that's not
And
right.
it's
relief
not
in most
enforced.
states.
Are you in favor of eliminating welfare benefits to legal immigrants?
I'm in favor of
Are you?
sponsors having more
Are
responsibility
you in
for the
favor of
relatives they
eliminating
sponsor.
welfare benefits
I'm
to
not.
legal immigrants? Yes
Just
or
because
no?
they happen to be legal
I'm in
immigrants. No.
favor of abiding by the rules, and they are that the hour is over. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Next week on Firing Line, host William F. Buckley Jr. talks with Frank Rich of the New York Times and James Fallows, author of Breaking the News, about the media versus democracy. This program was a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line was made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support was provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line. For information about a video cassette of this program, write to Firing Line, 2700 Cypress Street, Columbia, South Carolina, 29205, or call 803-799-3449. That's Firing Line, 2700 Cypress Street, Columbia, South Carolina, 29205, or call 803-799-3449.